All right, so things have started. We're just waiting for Todd to get going. There's 0 viewers right now, so that's not an issue. We have one viewer. If that viewer is Todd, you don't want to have that window open. Once you join the Hangout on Air, if the YouTube window is open, it's going to create extreme lag, probably like 15 seconds. There's a Hangout link in your email. Shut off YouTube. Go click that link. That should bring you into the conversation. Okay, we're down to 0 viewers, so hopefully that was Todd logging off. And he'll be joining the conversation shortly. Hey, buddy.
There we go. Okay.
Some issues?
Yeah, well, first of all, I did have the YouTube window open at the same time, so I closed that, and I think that's what I was actually kind of getting, there was too much going back and forth to the signal at the same time. It just wasn't connecting, so, boom, whatever.
All right. It's on.
Cool.
Just so I'm prepared, do you have something for the drink check, or do we want to just ignore that this time?
Yeah, you know what, there is tradition, and I've just got coffee. I'm not doing anything crazy with it.
Okay. I've got tea, so that'll work.
Okay. There we go. We're being classy about it.
Right. Trying to keep our heads about us. All right. So I'm just going to put a little pause in here so that's easy to catch for editing.
Okay.
And is there any format you want to go with, or?
No, I'm good with whatever works for you.
You don't want to do that.
Sure I do. I know you well enough. I don't even think of this as an interview. We're just going to shoot the shit for about an hour and just talk about how I played Samurai.
Alrighty. All right, so we'll give it like a 10 seconds, and then I'll get it started.
Okay.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Collateral. This one's going to kind of be a part Accidental Survivors, part Ottawa Game Publishers, because we're going to be talking about a game. We're going to be kind of going behind the scenes as well. And so hanging out here with me is my buddy from, who was actually an Accidental Survivor and then is the power behind the Ottawa Game Publishers podcast. Todd, how's it going?
Good. How's it going with you?
Not too bad. Beautiful spring day, almost summer.
Yeah, no, that I think it's safe enough that we can count it as summer. You know, I was outside sweating my balls off the other day, so that counts as summer.
Once the balls start sweating, that is what Canadians consider summer.
That is the actual metric by which we measure it.
All right. And for one of the reasons for us getting together to chat is High Plains Samurai, which is in Kickstarter mode right now. So for those people, I can't believe anybody hearing this wouldn't know what's going on. But for those people who don't, give us a quick elevator pitch. If you were in an elevator with someone who had expressed interest and you only had a couple minutes to let them know all the important points about High Plains Samurai, how would you deliver that?
Well, the first thing that I would do is I would hit the emergency stop on the elevator, and then I would take out a handful of different grenades. One grenade would say Western Gunslinger. Another grenade would say Samurai Warriors. Then there would be others that would say Arctic Barbarians, Steampunk Engineers, Prohibition era gangsters, post-apocalyptic world, mutant superpowers. And then what I would do is I would drop all the grenades down on the floor with the pins pulled, and then watch all the fun and the excitement happen.
Interesting. That would be a heck of a mess.
Wouldn't it though? But the thing about it though is that it is a glorious mess. It's one of those things when a lot of people hear the premise behind it, two things happen. The first thing everyone says is, whoa. Then they're like, whoa, hold on a sec. How does all that kind of stuff work together? And it's just one of those things where it was literally, I took all those elements and had just decided to just throw them all out there and see what would stick. And everything actually does stick. It all works together in a way that I don't question. It works, and everyone I've ever played it with just has, like this crazy exciting time. So I don't question it. It is what it is. The one land is something that is beyond definition.
Now, in this game, what do the characters do?
Well, the characters are they're anti-heroes in a sense. There's a lot of tropes that are very heavily borrowed off of Western Sergio Leone films, where you're basically the anti-hero, but eventually you're asked to step up and become the hero that you always knew that you were. So what the characters are doing is they start off the game basically surviving, finding a way to make ends meet and not get a bullet to the head or a sword across the neck. And the overall story that I have set with High Plains Samurai is that the one land, which was once this lush, peaceful paradise, was basically destroyed, almost destroyed by its creator, once known as Allfather, and is now called Chaos, who became jealous of the love and attention that his other children, the other spirits of this world, were giving to the one land, and so decided to punish his children by trying to destroy the one land. His children, the other elemental spirits, who are honor, patience, innocence, balance, and strife, they all stepped forward and they fought Chaos, and they basically locked him within the Shard of Hope. And so basically, there was now this post-apocalyptic wasteland that was left as a result, and the elemental spirits who remained behind had decided, you know what, the worst thing that we could have done with this place was to actually get directly involved, and so we're just going to go off, we're going to make sure that the universe doesn't collapse, we're going to manage all of existence, we're going to leave the one land alone because we have messed it up so badly. And so they've basically left the people, humans, behind to just basically survive off the scraps of what's left. And in doing so, there are the 5 cities that have risen up that are basically ruled by warlords. And this, basically the strong have basically stepped over top of the downtrodden and have basically created utopias for themselves, but have basically made it a shitstorm for everybody else. And so when the game starts, the lead characters are just trying to survive in this world when it becomes more and more apparent that Chaos is going to make a return and wants to finish what it started. And without the elemental spirits around to stop it, somebody else has to step forward and save the one land once and for all.
Very cool. Now,
yeah, no pressure.
Not at all, Mark.
Yeah.
Now, what are the behaviors or styles of play that the game rewards or punishes?
It's a story game, so there's a lot of player narrative control in the game. And one of the main things I wanted to do, and actually a lot of this I stole quite heavily from your games, your Nefertiti Overdrive especially, this whole concept of don't ask, tell. And so what the game does is it kind of flips the player GM dynamic a little bit on its head, in that the players are the ones who are actually in direct control of the story. They're the ones that start driving everything forward. It's their job to use their characters to take the story and continue to progress with it, move the action forward, enhance their characters just a little bit with each and every single turn. And then the GM's job is to react to that and make it work and coalesce, and also provide outcomes to be, how does this look? What are some of the other NPCs' reactions? So rather than having the GM basically come forward and say, okay, this is the story that we're going to tell, what the GM does is says, okay, this is the game, this is how it works, and this is basically the rough outline of the setting. What story do we want to tell? How do we want to tell this story? And then leave it to the players to drive it forward, while simultaneously kind of working behind the scenes and taking the different elements that have already been brought into play to kind of help keep everyone on track, keep everything interesting and flowing, but also to keep the players challenged at the same time, in challenging their characters. So when it comes to combat, because High Plains Samurai is a very combat heavy game, it's done through the typical measures where, like you have your extras, your mooks, as the case may be. That, you also have other main supporting characters that are there to offer, like challenges and make things, like really gritty, really harsh, make the combat really interesting. But there are also devices such as challenges that you can actually spend as points to basically say, okay, so you know how you said that you're actually out of ammo? I'm going to spend this challenge and basically say now that your gun is jammed. You cannot use your gun for the remainder of the scene until you have time to empty out and basically maintain it properly. And that's a way for the director to basically say, yeah, that's all fine and dandy, but let's make things a little bit more interesting. Oh, you know how there's the floor in this room that you're in? Well, the floor is going to actually collapse, and now you have to find a way to get across the room, without having the benefit of having the floor to walk on. It's one of those things where it creates this really rewarding dynamic where the players feel as if everything that they bring into the story is part of the story. It's not, being challenged. The dice are not going to deny whether or not something happens, but it's also done in a way that they're not in complete and total control, that it allows for a little bit of, kind of random elements to get into it to keep everybody on their toes back and forth.
Now, I think this is already coming through pretty strongly, but what part of the game are you most excited about?
Oh, you broke up for a sec there. You want to repeat that?
Yeah, saying it's what you're saying, but what part of the game are you most excited about?
Honestly speaking, the whole concept of descriptions and outcomes. So the way it works is that everybody basically has equal opportunity to bring something into their particular version of the story. This isn't a matter of telling the story of, the One Land and Chaos and Black Scorpion and all these other characters. This is a way to tell your version of it. Players in the game are actually known as writers, and the GM is known as writer. And it's basically, if you think of it as if, like someone comes to you and say, we've got this idea for a television series or a comic book or a series of movies about this place. It's called The One Land, and we're going to call it High Plains Samurai, but we need someone to write a first draft of a script for this. This is what everyone's doing at the table. And with each turn, players are basically giving descriptions through their characters' points of view. So even when the director has a turn, the director is choosing a character and providing a description based on that character's point of view. From there, another player at the table will then provide an outcome, that what happens as a result of that description. So if I were to provide a description that basically, as I walk into this tavern and I describe what I see when I look around and how I'm interacting with this tavern in this particular moment, within each description are a set number of details that you're allowed to incorporate into it. And you can think of a detail as basically any particular forward moving element in the description that helps move the story, characters, or the action forward in some meaningful way. You have a set number of a maximum number of details, sorry, based on a particular potential that you choose to use. And the potential is basically kind of like these overall descriptors that basically are ways that you define how your character stands out from someone else. So if you were to have a potential that was basically named Bounty Hunter, it would have a set number of details assigned to it. And you would basically say, okay, my character is going to use Bounty Hunter to describe how he's actually looking for his target here in the tavern. I have 3 details that I can incorporate into my description. Once I hit the maximum number of details, that description is now done and over. And another player will provide the outcome, which could be something as, you know, the bounty actually notices my character from the other end of the room, gets up and runs away. So it's always this element, a very improv style way of kind of building off of what's been incorporated before and adding onto it to continue to move the story forward. It's the part that I was really wanted to make sure that worked very well, this whole element of everybody being able to add something into the story, but being done in a way that when it works and you're actually doing it at the table, it feels flawless, and everyone starts to feel more and more invigorated to provide more and more details with it. And it's been so awesome to see people actually latch onto it, and in some cases go really nuts with it too. You know, it's just been so awesome to watch everyone embrace that style of play.
Yeah, and that's something that's kind of carried over from screenplay, which, again, if people have already played that or have read it, then they're going to be pretty comfortable with the mechanics that are in High Plains Samurai.
Yeah, the biggest difference between screenplay and High Plains Samurai is with screenplay, you choose the potential to kind of, you know, frame the description that you're going to give, but there's no requirement on hitting you know, a set number of details to determine what dice you might roll if you trigger a complication roll. High Plains Samurai, I added on the element of basically what you have to build your potential. So what that means is that if you have a potential that you're using that's listed at a D8 and has 3 details, the only way that you can roll that D8 is by adding on 3 details into your description. And the reason why I did this was because I was noticing early on that a lot of people were being fairly straightforward with how they were providing, different details in an action scene and a fight scene. And I wanted to really find a way to encourage people to add more onto it and embellish even further. And once we started doing that, a lot of people really started to bring these elements into it and say, like, you know, if you just walk up to someone and you describe your character walking up to someone and saying, like, I punch him in the face. Okay, you roll a d4 because that's just one detail. Okay. So what I do is I come up to the person and I actually do a backward spin kick and I actually kick their legs out from underneath them, and then I step over top and then I punch them in the face. Okay, that's 2 details. That'll give you a d6. Do you want to maybe add one more to hit your d8? Oh, yeah. Okay. So I walk up, I do the backward spin kick, I knock him down on the ground, and then I actually, like, with my other leg, I kick him over across his face. He actually then spins with his back along the floor counterclockwise till he hits the other end of the room, and then I grab a chair, run along, and then I smash him over the face with it. Now you hit your D8, and now you've actually created a much more interesting description in your fight scene than just, I punch him in the face.
Yeah, so you're basically, one of the behaviors that is rewarded is extreme detail, or even just extreme creativity with when you're dealing with character actions.
Exactly. It's one of those things. If you look at fight scenes, especially martial arts fight scenes as they take place in movies, there are so many more elements that go into it that makes it very difficult for an RPG to really kind of emulate properly, because otherwise there'd be so many dice rolls going back and forth, and when you start leaving so many of these elements up to the dice to determine, it gets really wonky. It really slows the game down after a while. So by having these kind of details that you put into it, and these are details that by no means actually restrict your opponent, they don't necessarily do damage. It's like the same token too. If you watch any of the Rocky movies, the number of times that Rocky gets pummeled, it is just atrocious. I know he's supposed to be a professional boxer, but still, that's a lot of beating that these opponents are able to take. But that's part of the genre of this style of combat. And so by adding them on as simply as more narrative elements, it's only when you say, okay, this is what I really want to do to the opponent. If, going back to that previous example, taking the chair and smashing someone across the face, that's the one that I actually want to do damage with. That's when a complication roll is triggered to determine, if a complication is going to take place and to whom, because there's always a risk of something backfiring and now the attacker has an issue to deal with as well. Take a look at especially Jackie Chan films. Things never go perfectly. It's not like he just walks in and he just kicks ass the entire way through. He has a lot of hurdles to overcome. He almost always starts the fights out being the underdog, and he then slowly overcomes bit by bit using skill and patience and everything else like this. And so this is one of the ways that the mechanics is, creates really interesting fight scenes that you as a player feel like you have control over the narrative, and you feel like your character will always be badass no matter how other elements work into play. These just give you something to say, like, okay, I go to shoot a guy in the face. And you roll it in a way that you have to take a complication, and you can decide, okay, I'm going to say I'm out of ammo. I'm going to use something else instead. Certain times your opponent gets to determine the complication that happens, So it creates this really interesting dynamic where no one person is ever controlling anything that happens in a fight.
Very cool. Now, of interviews discussing mechanics, and one of the things that we're going to do is in the Shockuments, we're going to be linking to the Kickstarter, which has a section with all the different interviews that you've done and actual plays and everything else. People can get a really good idea how the mechanics work. I'm interested in talking about the setting as well, because for a lot of people, mechanics are going to draw some people in, but I think the concept and the setting are what is going to get people's enthusiasm.
Agreed. Yeah, because it's a lot of work has been put into creating a setting that can take all of these elements and allow each thing to shine. There's plenty of room that's in there, and not just the different genres that have been brought into this. There's been a lot of people who have really embraced the Western aspect of it, but there's a lot of other elements that people are able to bring in as they need it, as they want to bring it in. And I think it's the setting has, really has something a lot deeper that I've really been trying to build into it, is something that kind of gives all of the mechanics and the gameplay a purpose and a reason for being there other than just this splashy backdrop.
Now, when the game started, it was very much it was a mashup. It was a mashup of martial arts and Western. And it has grown to include a lot of other genres and ideas. And so what drove you to widen the scope of the One Land?
Well, first of all, there is the fact that, especially to the initial idea of High Plains Samurai, which, in the very, very beginning was simply Western gunslingers and samurai warriors, it felt way too much like another game that's out there, a rather infamous game that I am not going to mention by name, but many other people I'm sure can actually connect those two dots together. And so I thought,
Yep.
okay, well, there needs to be more to add on to this. And like I mentioned before, I just started grabbing a few other kind of elements of like, well, this seems kind of cool. And I kind of like the idea of this. You know what? What the hell? Everyone loves steampunk. Let's try and throw that in there. But everything was built around this concept of that these are all character types who are very much bound by a sense of honor. Even the idea of like the steampunk engineers. Anyone who ever knows any kind of creative person knows that there's one thing that they, refuse to lie down for, and that's someone else taking credit for their work. The creating things with a higher purpose, like I create things to help people. I've heard quite a few stories of so many different inventors who actually have turned away from what they created. So, for example, like the Wright brothers, when they created the airplanes, and then later on when they started to be used in war, they saw this as a way to basically kind of helping with peace. And then later on when they started to see their planes being used in World War One, it basically is like it sickened them. And so when I started to realize that all of these characters were all people that had their own sense of honor, and that was what actually united them, it kind of gave everything the sense of, yeah, all of this stuff could work together. And when you have a post-apocalyptic world where basically everyone has segmented themselves, they've alienated themselves from the rest of the world, and they've clustered themselves within these communities, it makes total sense that each one has kind of branched off and developed their own way. Some of them have much higher levels of technology than others. Some of them, the people are just constantly struggling just to eat or find something to drink. Others are thriving. So it was just something where having the setting to basically kind of explain how all of these different character types can exist together, but then also unify them in this common cause of chaos has come back to finish the job. Somebody has to stop him. Is where High Plains Samurai for me really, it really gives it some depth and material. And the work that you have been able to start doing by fleshing out Black Scorpion, who is also one of the central villains of the story, the work that you've been doing in fleshing out her origin story and everything like that has given it even kind of more gravitas than I had ever imagined before. Originally, it was just like, this would be really cool if, and this would look cool if. Now it really feels like it has some depth, and that if you want to tell a gritty story of High Plains Samurai, that you easily could. And if you want to stick with something that's really kind of like flashy, basically put it this way: if you wanted to do a Michael Bay version of High Plains Samurai, there's more than enough elements to do something like that. If you want to tell it from more like a grittier point of view, there's definitely room to do that. There's elements in there as a result of the setting.
Very cool. Yeah, the it's interesting. Actually, when we first started playtesting this, because I'm one of the playtest group, Black Scorpion was perhaps not incidental to the plot, but counter that much. And in discussing where you have plans to send the game, depending upon how much money the Kickstarter makes, Black Scorpion seems to have increased in importance for the one land.
Yeah, Black Scorpion originally went, well, first of all, there's two major changes that happened. The first of which is that Black Scorpion's gender changed. And a lot of that was just Black Scorpion was just basically there as, well, there needs to be almost like this video game level of uber villain. There's just the big boss at the end of the game that you have to fight, figure it out, his patterns and his routines, and then, oh, there's the weak spot, and that's what I got to go for. Almost as kind of like, every game needs to have the big bad villain. So here we go. It's Black Scorpion. But then later on, as you and I started talking about what to do with this, once I brought you on board to start writing, some fiction, to start fleshing some things out, and we started talking about ways to not only kind of flesh out the diversity that's in the game, but also to make Black Scorpion a more interesting character, turning Black Scorpion into a woman. made sense because first of all, I think it's an almost very unexpected element, because when I started looking at how I had perceived the character and how I had automatically defaulted to a male, and I have very specific, very kind of plain, bland vision of, like of what this dude would look like. And I started to imagine that that would be everyone else's impression. Whenever you start hearing legends about an infamous character, there's this picture that everyone always kind of plants in their head for what that person must be like. But then when you actually encounter, the true actual person, they're never quite what you imagine to be. And in a sense, they always end up being much more interesting because there's so many more layers going into them. And by having Black Scorpion with this, rather than as someone who's just, always led like the biggest gang known in the one land, and someone who was always like a thorn in the warlord's side, to someone who basically grew up in extreme oppression, didn't even have a name, who was known simply as the dog, and just the ultimate outcast amongst all societies, who then rose up because of this power that she almost couldn't control, with this rage that she couldn't control, that was basically just kind of thrust into this position of authority that she originally didn't want in the first place, finally has a moment to gain peace, and find purpose without violence, only to have that taken from her to the point that she decides, not only am I going to embrace my past, this is who I actually am. Clearly, the only thing the world wants from me is violence, and so I will give the world violence like it has never seen before. And in doing so, I am going to lay waste to everything until either everything is gone and turned to ash, or I'm gone, and only then can I be at rest. Adding those elements into there has really made the character something where it's like, that's a villain. It's not, she's not a bad guy. She's a villain because she's a character that you can understand. When you know why she's doing what she's doing, you can almost sympathize. I almost kind of want it where I hope one day to find out that there are players out there who said, unfortunately, we had to kill Black Scorpion, rather than, fuck yeah, we just killed Black Scorpion and it was awesome. I want there to be this kind of loss at having to actually defeat this villain.
Yeah, well, it's almost like Darth Vader in Star Wars was a menacing figure and everything, but you didn't really have much sympathy for him. You couldn't. And then through Empire and Return of the Jedi, you actually did start feeling sympathy for him, realizing what he was and what he had been. It's also the same, and you mentioned Michael Bay. And when Michael Bay was still making good movies, he made a movie called The Rock. And in that one, you completely sympathize with the villain. And when he does die, not at the hero's hand, spoiler, the movie came out like the early 90s. But when he does die, you actually feel horrible for him. You totally understand why he's doing what he's doing. And the real villains are both the people that made him do that, and then the bad guys are on the bad guy's side that are only interested in money.
Exactly, and there's even that one scene where Ed Harris is about to actually press the button and actually go through with launching these missiles, and some of the people in his own unit who are like loyal to a T start to turn on him, because they start to realize, okay, whoa, I thought we were just here to threaten everybody, and it's that level. But you do understand exactly why he's doing what he's doing. And that's what makes a villain so interesting. I really tried to, once we started to kind of flesh the character out like this, I could really kind of see more like the villains in John Woo's movies. Not all of them necessarily, like Hard Boiled, like there's a villain who's just a villain for the sake of being a villain. But when you start looking at the killer, you see someone who, like kills people for a living, and he's brutal and everything like this, but then you start to see the humanity, and it really makes you look at the character from a completely different point of view. And those are so much more interesting than anything else. But they're also optional too. Like, you can completely glaze over as much of that as you want to and simply stick with, no, we just want to have like, someone big bad that we can fight at the end of it. Totally fine. There's really no wrong way to approach it, because what High Plains Samurai does is give you these different elements to say, what do you think? Do you like this? Go ahead, add it to your shopping cart, so to speak. And then when you're done, then start, piecing all these elements together as you see fit.
Actually, the Italian fat character, depending upon the version that you have and the subtitles that you have, called John, in most of them, his character in The Killer is actually a perfect High Plains samurai character, in that he's an anti-hero. He's technically a bad guy, but he's not a bad guy. He has a creed. He has a honor that he lives by. And while you might not see him as magical or anything, come on, look at the shit that he does in that movie. That guy's got some kind of crazy chi power.
Yep. Yeah, and it's the whole dynamic of of good versus evil, and I've always found evil for the sake of being evil is just being dull. Whereas evil, who is basically someone who wanted to do good but was just pushed to a breaking point and has decided to do something that others would not do. It's such a much more interesting way to take a look at it. And like I said, like if when you feel bad for having to defeat your enemy because you understand them, it's just such a better, deeper story that I hope, that's one of the things that we've really just recently been able to start adding into this game, is that level of depth that I thought for a while may have been missing. And now I really kind of feel like, oh yeah, this is exactly the kind of thing that I was hoping for. And now we have really concrete ways to kind of build these elements in there for those who want to go that deep.
Yeah, the story of Black Scorpion now is much more of a tragedy, whereby she's trying to do good most of the time and desires to do good, but has a fatal flaw that the world just keeps picking at until it finally breaks her.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also too, a lot of it has to do with, like, she is an incredibly powerful chi warrior. I've been intentionally being very vague about Black Scorpion's chi power, simply because the way that, and it's still something I'm working on, locking down the definition of how it's going to actually be presented. But her power is, in a sense, is very mysterious, and it's one of those things that I want players to discover as they're going. It's not just like, fireballs all of a sudden come out of her hands and everyone's like, oh, okay, she controls fire. It's something that's at a much deeper level, and it's been a power that she's never really been able to control, and that's what's always alienated her from before. And it's not until her mentor Hosan actually sees this power in action and realizes the potential that she has to not just be a bandit leader for the Desert Sun gang that he controls, but to take this gang of thugs and brigands and bandits and make them a rebellion to actually fight against the oppressive warlords. Because if there are any characters who are very kind of black and white villains, it's the warlords who control the 5 cities, these 5 main fortresses of different shapes and sizes that are basically, oppressing the people. They're the true villains, and they do it simply for the sake of power. They're the standard dictators, and they're there and they exist. They're, like I said, they're the black and white characters, but it's the story of Black Scorpion that will really be able to show off to the world and really be able to demonstrate when the Kickstarter hits $7,000, because that's when I'm going to take High Plains Samurai, the core game, and I'm going to expand it out into High Plains Samurai Black Scorpion's Revenge, that can exist as a standalone. And hopefully, if things do really well, even if it's not through the Kickstarter, but just through sales once the final product gets released, I have a trilogy in mind now about the rise of the return of chaos that will involve Black Scorpion. And I'm just really excited that we're getting closer and closer to being able to share that story, because it's so much more interesting now than I had ever imagined possible. And it's awesome because so much of the work that I've been doing has been so mechanically focused on making sure that things are functional and that everything reads properly and everyone knows what I'm talking about when I go on about the mechanics, that it's so awesome to know that there's now these story elements that we'll be able to put into the game to help really create a fully fleshed out, detailed story that's what this is about, is creating a story, not just playing a game.
And that's absolutely true. The beautiful part is that because you've done such work on perfecting the mechanics, and it has been a long time gestating, and it's had many different forms, and I think you finally brought it to a definitely, I mean, to be honest, even earlier incarnations, I think were ready for prime time. This one absolutely is. It's perhaps beyond ready for prime time. It's almost bulletproof. But because you've got such a strong foundation, it's then much easier to then set that aside and say, okay, now I want to build on this. I've got such a strong foundation. As with a skyscraper, you need to have a deep foundation to build a tall skyscraper. Well, you've got a deep foundation now, and now you're going to be able to build a huge skyscraper story.
Yeah, exactly. It also, using your skyscraper reference, skyscrapers also have to be able to bend with the wind. Otherwise, eventually they'll actually crack and they'll just topple right over. And that's one of the other things with this too, is I have been working on developing how this treatment, because I don't call these adventures, I call them treatments, how this exactly will be provided, because this is the main thing with the game is run, like I said, where the writers are the ones who actually have the control over the narrative of the story. The director is the one who basically, looks at the different characters, the different NPCs that are in play, and says, okay, well, what would they do as a result of, and everything else like this. And so the way that Black Scorpion's Revenge will actually be provided will be through a series of scenarios that are basically, if this, then this. And one of the things that came to me even a couple of weeks ago, just when I was, walking around in my yard with my son and everything like this, and there's a benefit to living in the middle of the country where no one can see me or hear me talking to myself out loud. And because my son's only 2 years old, it still counts. I can still talk about stuff, and he's not going to know what I'm talking about. When all of a sudden it just kind of hit me is that scenarios can be done in a way that they actually change the supporting characters in the story. So you could have a moment where, for example, you could have one of the supporting characters has a loved one that's in the town of Yangtze. If something happens to that loved one, that character now takes on a new potential that is much more revenge driven, or it allows them to increase that potential up by another step so that their dice level is higher, their defense is higher, they even have one extra detail. These scenarios can actually be done in a way so that they actually alter the setting itself as you actually play, and that's going to be reactions based on what the writers have brought into the story. And having that element thrown in there as well, what it does is that basically not only can each story end up with a different ending, but they could end up with completely different versions of the main characters in play. One group's Black Scorpion in the very final scene could look entirely different from the Black Scorpion that belongs to another group. I've always loved the idea of games being kind of like parallel universes of a similar story, that the whole kind of planescape approach to say, like, well, each of the prime material worlds, you could look at them as being everyone's home campaign, and they all exist in different ways, and you can travel from one to the other and see how, one version of Toril, how does this one look compared to this version of Toril? And I love the idea that now that there's going to be a way to make that happen, that really embraces the story aspect of it. The game mechanics allow you to tell the story in a way that fits your own group, but the treatment itself is going to be a way to basically kind of help you build onto the story and really make it something your own.
And that's interesting. High Plains Samurai, like screenplay, is very story-driven, very story-based, and one of the things that stories do is they change with every generation. Every generation retells the same stories in different ways to bring out those aspects of the story that are most important to them or seem most fitting. And so that's very similar to what's happening with your treatments, in that rather than generations, it's groups. Each group is going to change and mutate the treatment, both by what they've done previously, but also in how they view what is important in the story. And some of them are going to be tragedies, and some are going to be straight up action adventures.
Yeah, exactly. Even some of the one shots that I've been running at conventions, And those ones I always kind of let everyone just kind of go wild with it, just to really be able to embrace the narrative style of it. And also too, it's kind of like, in a one shot, there's, little to no consequences, so to speak. It's really just showcasing how the game actually worked itself. But I mean, I've had, even then with that, 3-4 hour window, the way that that players have really presented their characters and really framed the action has been completely different. I've run the playtest scenario that involves a train robbery. Basically, I've run it with some groups that basically they started themselves off as a motorcycle gang that existed in the middle of the wastes, which is this radioactive desert. That basically this is where the Battle of Chaos took place, and his energy actually permeates everything, to the point that the more violent things get with the train robbery, the land itself actually begins to react and join in on the fun. So I've had some groups that they've described themselves as a motorcycle gang, and just each one of them just presents a different way, that like the kind of bike that they're riding on and everything else like this. And then I've had other ones who have really kind of kept things at a certain level. It's like, no, let's keep it at a really kind of scrounging level of technology. Something can only exist if it happened in our world, kind of thing. And they've all really taken it and gone off in their own direction. Some of them have really just embraced it and gone really wild gonzo with it, and others have really kind of kept it somewhat grounded to a certain level, as much as you can do in a fantasy game that has all these different elements thrown into it. And it's been really nice to see that everyone's really taken all of this and gone their own way with it. And the game's been able to hold up no matter how nuts things get, or how realistic, quote unquote, things are able to get. And I think a lot of that has to do with what's probably the one fundamental rule in the game, is called the rule of initiatives. And that it's like anything that gets incorporated into the game by another player basically becomes their, they have final ownership of it, so to speak. And so that's always been a concept of respect what someone else has brought into the story. You're not here to completely change it to suit your own whims. If you go and take something that another player has brought into the story, and this includes the director as well. So this is actually a fail-safe that allows the director to maintain some level of control over the setting, because it basically, what the rule of initiatives does is says, anything that you bring into it, whether or not it's through the opening shot when you first start a scene, or just the way that you describe how a certain thing looks through an outcome, you retain the final ownership of it. And if it's not what you had intended it to be, then you can actually ask for a rewrite. And having that in there as kind of like this fail-safe to keep everyone from going too nuts with everything has really helped, but without being a burden. I've never run a game where someone's had to rewrite something else because they didn't go in the right direction. It just kind of gives this safety net for everyone to say like, oh, okay, so we're just going to work with that. Yeah, that's cool. I can go with that. And then they're able to build off of it. It really embraces everyone's just kind of natural inclination at storytelling. It might not be good storytelling, but that's the thing. You're making the first draft of a story. It's what works for your audience, which is the players at that table right then and there. And it's been one of those things that's been really nice to see about the system, and that it's been holding up time and time and time and time again.
And I don't think they need to worry about making a good story as long as people are having fun. That by the definition of a game is a good story. And the going from relatively realistic to gonzo insane, I think one of the strengths of the system is that it's relatively abstract, and that within the only constraints are the number of details to get a certain number of dice. And you can either do that by detailing a very realistic, believable action or chain of events, or going complete wushu and walking on water and then dancing on some pine trees. This to the system, the narrative and the mechanics are not exclusive, but they're not necessarily reinforcing, and that does give you a lot of leeway to arrive at the narrative how you like.
Yeah, and it's set up in a way too, kind of like the default way of playing. The way I really like to play it is by telling it as if, okay, we're making a movie. We're writing the first draft of a screenplay. And then as the director, what that does is that allows me to bring in camera angles. So like if anyone has listened to the comic strip AP of me running it with Nick, aka Fuzzy Nick, that's the way that I like to play. And it's so much so that it bleeds over into other games that I run now. I did Night Witches at Can Games last month, and I was still doing camera angles and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, no, this is how I GM now, baby. So that's the default way of playing. But there are other ways too that if you decide that you want to, if everyone in the group wants to tell this like a novel, then what that does is that also frames how you provide the descriptions, because now you're leaving yourself open to be able to have inner monologue. Now you can actually openly address what people are thinking, how they interpret things, build those things into your descriptions. Whereas if you want to go with a very visual medium, then you have to frame everything in a way where it's like, well, how would we see that visually? You can do the whole Dune thing and you can still have voiceover. But really, it's one of those things where you're really playing up to the medium that everyone feels comfortable with, and it's one of those things where you can play High Plains Samurai again and as obviously as I have with numerous different people and groups, and each time you can kind of borrow from different elements or look at it different ways. I've run it for a group that actually we approached it like a comic book, and so each description was actually a panel, and everything that we did had to somehow fit within this one particular panel, or sometimes we would make it work in a couple of panels. So it really it's very open and intuitive to whatever style and approach that everyone wants to take into it.
Very cool. Now, depending on on the money that the Kickstarter makes, there's going to be different versions. But you've said that even if you don't hit those, we might still see them. What is the difference between getting them funded through Kickstarter and what might come later if it's not funded through Kickstarter?
Well, right now, the Kickstarter basically, unless like a crap load of people all of a sudden cancel their pledges, please don't do that. Like basically the game is funded. So the version that's going to happen right now, if the Kickstarter were to end at this very moment, the gong were to strike, then it would be the core rulebook, which would be about 96 pages. Odds are I'll probably add on a little bit extra onto there, but it will basically be a core rulebook that will say, here's how the game is played. Here's the basics of the setting. Here's some advice as the director on how to, build on these elements and incorporate into it and do a damn good job. And then it just leaves it kind of open and out there. There are these different elements. The whole concept of the 5 cities and the warlords of Black Scorpion and Chaos will be in there to do as you see fit. If we hit 7,000, and at this point we are definitely on target to hit that, what will happen is that core rule book will be expanded out into 160-page, roughly, combination of core rulebook and treatment for Black Scorpion's Revenge. And in that one, I will definitely flesh out much more the advice section for the director on how to basically keep a story moving forward while leaving the narrative control in the hands of the players, how scenarios will work out. And then the bulk of the treatment itself will actually be divided into chapters based on the 6 major locations in the story. So, one for each of the 5 cities, and then another one for the waste itself. And then that will provide about 3 to 4 pages of more specific setting material, a little bit more detailed history on how that particular location has evolved since the Wrath of Chaos, what it has become now, different environmental factors to bring into play, and then it will start getting into scenarios on basically, if this happens, then this, and if this, and here's how it could change this location, how it could change these characters, to really give the director all the tools that they, hopefully would need in order to tell their version of the story. So that's what will happen at 7,000. I have additional stretch goals, and if I don't hit them, then publishing the rest of this trilogy that I have in mind, because Black Scorpion's Revenge really focuses on Black Scorpion rising out of, her own personal hell and saying, fuck the rest of the world. I'm going to burn it to the ground to get revenge on all of those who have suffered. That's going to be its own thing that can completely exist as its own story. What I have in mind is taking that and turning it into a trilogy that will basically say, okay, yes, there was that, but here's how that event actually triggered the return of chaos. And from that anarchy, will feed chaos and give it rise to become stronger and stronger until eventually you have to actually fight chaos. You have to actually defeat chaos. This means basically taking your characters and elevating them to an almost kind of godlike status of storytelling and action. So you could almost look at it as if this trilogy would be a way to tell like an entire campaign. If you were to look at this as a D&D style, Black Scorpion's Revenge, you could look at as being kind of like the level 1 to 7 adventure. The middle story, which is called The Fallen City, would cover like levels 8 to 15. And then the final part of the trilogy called The Fourth Mark, which anyone who has looked through the Kickstarter edition will know that, the marks of chaos are historical moments that indicate how chaos tried to destroy the world. The fourth mark would basically be like the level 16 to 20 version of the story. So this entire trilogy will basically really take it, and just elevate it, just keep pushing the boundary more and more and more. If I don't reach those stretch goals through the Kickstarter, then it's going to be basically up to the sales itself. And then those will be released as 24 or 32 page. I'm not entirely sure, how big those will be at this point, but I would very much like to find a way to be able to get them out there.
And they'll get out there sooner or later someday, because this thing's going to be a huge success.
The initial reaction, we hit $3,000 basically within 47 hours. And that was staggering, because I've spent about a year plugging numbers, nope, drop this down. Nope, that's too low. Bring it back up and everything else like this. And I've been shitting bricks, about even just being able to raise 3,000. And to hit that in 47 hours really indicates, like, there were just shy of 1,000 downloads of the playtest edition. There is something about this setting that just really resonates with people. I even just, before we started to record this, while I was waiting for you to, give me the ding to join in, I found a blog post that someone wrote where basically, and they backed High Plains Samurai. He doesn't like story games. He doesn't see the thing about story games. He doesn't understand it, but he still saw this and he still backed it just for the whole concept alone. So there is something about High Plains Samurai that resonates with people. My job now is to make sure that what everyone's hoping for is actually delivered. And it's one of those things where I like having that kind of, that kind of pressure, so to speak, to make sure that I make something that's a worthy product, because now there's something at stake other than, like, I need to make sure I hit my completion date. Now it's like, no, not only do I need to hit that, I need to make something that's awesome that will make people say, fuck, I should have backed this. I should have backed it right from the very start. I should have got in on this on the ground floor. That's my goal.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be a problem achieving that goal. Before we wrap this up, is there anything that we haven't discussed, or anything that you want to emphasize?
Oh boy, at this point, I think at this point, I just really want to give thanks to, when we record this, there's 194 backers of the Kickstarter. And I want to thank all 194 of you, to whatever the level that your backing is, for taking a look at this game that has basically consumed 20% of my brain for the last 4 years. And I mean, consistently, I drive to work, I'm thinking about High Plains Samurai. I'm in the office, I'm thinking about High Plains Samurai, you know. Just for putting your trust in this project and myself with your hard-earned money. So yeah, I just want to thank all the backers, and for all the future backers, all of you out there listening to this who still have a chance to getting in on it and decide, yeah, you know what, I'm going to give this a chance. Put $1 in, you'll get a copy of the Kickstarter edition PDF, which is the current version of the game. It gives the full rules, everything you need to know. You could actually start playing your own version of High Plains Samurai now. It has rules for all the different characters. It has a list of different perks based on your homelands. Everything is there. You can see for yourself. It's even 95% laid out. There are 3 blank spaces for future artwork this Kickstarter is going to be paying for. Otherwise, this sucker is ready to go, that you can see for yourself exactly what you'll be backing on. I'm confident that once you see it at that level, that you'll want to give more to get a bigger, better version of the final game.
Absolutely. All right, man. Well, thanks for taking the time to chat, and looking forward to the huge success of High Plains Samurai.
I'll take moderate success. But yeah, the huge success would be awesome too. If we hit 5 digits on this kind of thing, I might, for the first time in my life, faint.
That'd be cool. I want to be there.
Yeah. You know how most people do kind of like dancing videos of themselves when their Kickstarter's done?
Yeah.
I think I'll just shoot a video of myself fainting.
Excellent. We'll post it for sure.
Okay, cool.
All right. Well, that's that. Stay frosty.
Peace.